That's pretty awesome. See, to me, that makes perfect sense, and it actually feels more valid than a physicalist interpretation.
Yes.
Because but now there's a lot of weirdness in this
Yes.
that we could talk about for hours, and I think we should make this point that there are quite a few physicists now that are saying things like space-time as a objective reality is doomed. It's
Right.
not. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And looking at, and you do this in the book very well, going through quantum mechanics and saying, hey, what's going on here? This actually doesn't make sense if you're trying to say that objects exist in and of themselves in space and time, then you have to kind of say, well, quantum mechanics isn't right. But all experimental evidence shows that it is right. And it's weird in a way that it's more consistent with the conscious agent theory than it is with a physicalist theory. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right in the following sense that experiments have shown that local realism is false. So the joint claim that objects exist and have definite values of their properties, like position, momentum, and spin, and that those properties have influences that propagate through space and time no faster than the speed of light. So the joint of those two has been shown, which is local realism, that's shown to be false. Now, some physicists will then go and say, well, look, I still want to keep the realism. Like David Bohm, for example,
Right.
would propose that an electron has a position, a momentum, even when it's not observed, a definite value, but that there's these non-local influences. But there's another aspect, another theorem about what's called non-contextual realism, which says, and non-contextual realism, it turns out non-contextual realism contradicts quantum theory. So if you're a quantum theorist, you have to say that non-contextual realism is false. And that says both that realism, so it's realism, but also that the properties like position, momentum, and spin have values that don't depend on how you look at them, how you observe them.
Doesn't depend on the context, doesn't depend on the measurement.
That's the claim of non-contextual realism, and non-contextual realism is false. And notice, that's false independent of locality issues. So I think non-contextual realism is the real tough one here for our idea of realism. To say that a physical object has definite positions and other properties, momentum, spin, and so forth, that don't depend on how we observe them, that is false. And that gets really closer to the heart of saying, well, now the realism is the really bad thing here. But then you pointed out that state-of-the-art physicists like Nima Arkani Hamed at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, they're saying, look, when we try to bring general relativity and quantum field theory, the standard model of physics, together into some kind of theory of everything, or unified theory, we're finding that we're going to have to let go of space-time. That physics for the last 3 centuries has been about what happens inside space and time. And now we're going to have to let go of space-time. It's not fundamental. There's something else that's more fundamental from which space-time arises as an emergent concept or property. And they don't know what that deeper thing is. He's dealing with something that he calls the amplituhedron. And what he's finding is in the Large Hadron Collider, when they shoot particles and smash them into each other, and you start having these interesting events like 2 gluons smashing into each other and 4 gluons spraying away. You try to write down the probabilities, what they call the scattering amplitudes, but the probabilities for these things to happen, all these smashing and scattering events. And you find if you do it inside space and time, so you do all those calculations in space and time, the math is nasty. You get hundreds of pages, even 1,000 pages of algebra that you have to compute. And they've discovered you miss certain symmetries in the data that are there, but cannot be expressed in space-time. But if you go to this deeper geometry that he calls the amplituhedron, you capture these deeper symmetries that are not expressible in space-time, and the math becomes trivial. You can write it on the back of an envelope and calculate it by hand. And so these two things start to convince physicists that, hey, space-time has had a good run. It was a great horse for 300 years. It's been really, really good. but that doesn't mean it's the truth. It was a really good vehicle for our thoughts for several centuries. Now it's come to the end of its usefulness. We need something deeper. And they don't know what the deeper thing is. And the really brilliant thinkers at the state of the art aren't worried about that. For them, this is like, holy smoke, fabulous. There's something new to learn here. The old guys and their space-time, they did a good job, but us young guys are going to do something even more fun. So what's behind space and time, and how does it give rise to space and time? Whatever the new theory is, it will be constrained by our old theories. Whatever the new theory is, when we project it into space-time, we'd better get back general relativity or a generalization of it, and also the standard model or a souped-up version of it. But so we can't throw away what we've done. We don't want to throw away what we've done. In fact, it's all the work that we've done in the physicalist space-time science is great work. It is a constraint on any deeper theory we have. It better project back in space-time to our current scientific theories. And the same is true of my models of consciousness. I will be able to test them as I develop the theory of conscious agents and get a mathematics of the evolution of consciousness. One constraint on my theory will be when I project it back into space and time, I better get back all of modern science. Evolution by natural selection, general relativity, quantum field theory, or hopefully even generalizations of those theories. If I can't do that, I'm wrong. And if I'm not smart enough to figure out what the dynamics of consciousness is about, then what I will probably do, or my team, is to look at the dynamics that we know about in space and time, pull it back from the interface into the realm of conscious agents and ask what kind of dynamics would give rise to the dynamics in space and time.
Reverse engineer.
Reverse engineer it and then go, oh, so that's what consciousness is about. So I hope to do it from first principles, but if I can't, then I'm going to fall back to, okay, let's I'm just not bright enough to figure it out, so we'll try to pull it back and reverse engineer.
Which, the Chinese are very good at this.
Yeah.
They're pretty smart.
It works.
Yeah, it worked. See, okay, all that is, again, in my, I'm a doctor. I'm just a medical doctor, Don. I'm very, very limited in my icon, in my desktop understanding of this. But I'll say this, that physics and that sort of, and I'm going to argue this, medicine has hit a wall.
Yes.
And so we've been on a tear for centuries, like you said, and it's because we've really figured out in fine-grained detail how to master this space-time icon desktop that we have.
Right.
So we're really good at manipulating icons.
Yes.
Surgery is manipulating icons, right? We're not playing with we don't understand conscious agents or anything underneath it.
No.
We're like, I move appendix to outside of this physical space,
Right.
Patient doesn't die.
Yes.
I take gallstone out of this tube, patient doesn't die or have pain. So actually there's an experiential connection, right? Patient no longer experiences pain if I move this icon here. But now we're at a wall where we're like, how do we explain schizophrenia? Our reductionist, materialist approaches are no longer working. We're finding that things like the placebo effect, this sort of mind-body integration, these kind of ideas, we can't explain them properly, and it's because we're using a physicalist framework. We're mistaking our interface for reality, and we're running up to the boundaries of that. Right? We're now, well, how do you explain this? Well, what I think about your theory is you're saying, well, okay, this is the next iteration now. Let's reframe all this. Same science. You don't throw anything out.
Right.
You transcend and include and say, yeah, of course.
Exactly.
In our interface, that makes perfect sense. Here's what's beyond the interface. So maybe now we can solve these bigger problems of how it is that all these, and we're gonna have to get into how it is that conscious agents even work. So maybe that's the next part of this conversation. Yeah. But so I think that's where the opportunity is with your theory. If it's true, you have a mathematical model of how conscious agents exert dynamics with each other, how they instantiate higher levels of more complex conscious agents. So in that world, you and me are both perceive, decide, act. That's what we're able to do.
Exactly.
But we're made up of smaller conscious agents that are nested that also do that feed up experience to us at the higher level, and we feed down to them, and it's this dynamic relationship that creates a human.
Absolutely.
And also keeps psychotherapists employed.
That's right.
Because it's our unconscious mind is actually nested conscious agents that are in their own way conscious, but that we can't directly access that.
That's right. And I think there's a good, as we get into the realm of conscious agents and talk about how they're nested and so forth, I think it's good to step back just for a second and say that, as you were just saying a moment ago, we've gotten very, very good at the interface. We're like, in the Grand Theft Auto example that we're using, we've become wizards at playing Grand Theft Auto. And we've become stunningly good. We used to be really bad at playing our interface, and we died from not being able to take out problems in the body and so forth. And now we've gotten really, so we're wizards at Grand Theft Auto. But now imagine someone who discovers that Grand Theft Auto, that's just the program on the screen that you're seeing. There's all the circuits and software, and they actually get access to the code. And they realize that they can hack the code. They can start to do stuff to Grand Theft Auto that the wizards are going to go, that is magical. I had no idea that you could do that. So the wizards themselves will be left in the dust. And that's what this new level of seeing the conscious agents behind objective reality is going to open up a Pandora's box. It will be allowing us to get behind the screen and get into the source code of the game and even change the parameters perhaps of space and time. So this is going to be, the technology that comes out of this is going to be truly, truly stunning. All of our scientific tools and our theories have been about the interface and how it works. We've been wonderful at that. The tools of science are up to the job of going beyond the interface and looking at this realm of conscious agents that are behind the interface, and then reverse engineering that whole thing and playing our interface. So this is going to bring a lot of responsibility to us, because it's going to open up, once we understand the mapping from conscious agents into our space-time interface, and we understand how to hack it, who knows what kind of technologies are going to open up. This is great for science fiction, to think about the possibilities. But it will leave current scientific technology in the dust. It's going to be a whole new level. But now we can go after what I think right now my ideas are about this conscious agents realm. And I should say, what you described is exactly how I'm thinking about it. That you can have these simple one-bit agents, and it's a really austere conscious realm. I mean, there's only two experiences that this consciousness has. I mean, what would it be like to be such an austere conscious agent? It's hard to put myself into the shoes of that conscious agent. When they interact, you can have 2-bit agents and 4-bit agents and all the way up to infinity. So you could have infinite conscious agents. And this opens really interesting technical questions. How many infinite conscious agents are there? Is there one biggest, all-inclusive infinite conscious agent? I mean, this is going to be a matter of theorems now. I don't know the answer. Maybe there are a bunch of infinite conscious agents and not one at the top. Or maybe there is just the one, in which case we're all conscious agents that are part of this one big conscious agent, but we're all genuinely single conscious agents ourselves interacting with the one. So these kinds of issues, which are obviously in the spiritual realm now, when we talk about infinite consciousness and so forth, we're talking about things that various Eastern and Western spiritual traditions have talked about. But we've only used words. For the first time, we can use mathematics. And my definition of conscious agent is probably wrong. And my definition so I could propose a definition of God. It's the one infinite conscious agent. So for the first time, I've proposed a mathematically precise theory of the word God. Of course I'm probably wrong. That's not the point. The point is to have something precise on the table, so now science can start. Because once you have something precise on the table, then people can jump on it and say, well, I think it's wrong because of that, and if we do this experiment, we'll show you that you're wrong. Now we can actually start to evolve our ideas. And so that's what I want as one feature out of this theory, is that we get a scientific spirituality. The biggest and deepest questions, the most human and personal questions, that for thousands of years we've only had words, lectures, but no mathematically precise statements and predictions. Why shouldn't we use the best tools of understanding that we have, namely the scientific method, to address the questions that are the most important to us as human beings? science is up to the task. And so what I want to see is an interaction between I think the genuine ideas that the spiritual traditions have come up with and the new methods of science that take those ideas, make them absolutely precise, make rigorous predictions that we can test, and then go back and forth. That's how we find out which of our ideas are the genuine insights and which are just nonsense. And of course, we have both. And spiritual traditions have both. They have genuine insights and they'll have nonsense. And how do we figure out which is which? We start to use the scientific method to make all of our ideas precise and then test them and then see what works and what doesn't. So I'm very interested in those potential outcomes in science and spirituality to break down what is a bit of an animosity right now between the two.
Non-overlapping magisteria.
That's right, as Stephen Jay Gould said. Right.
And you're arguing no. You can use the scientific method to have a scientifically precise spirituality that has to do with, starts with conscious agent theory and boots up everything, because higher agents than us maybe classically have been called angels.
Right.
Higher agents than that may have classically been called gods.
Right.
Higher agent than that may have classically been called God.
Exactly.
And you can actually start to talk about it in a way where people don't look at you like you're insane, because you're not. It's not based on belief. It's based on, well, let's test this.
Absolutely. And by the way, the ideas that I'm putting out here, I'll be the first to say I'm probably wrong. So what I believe is that the ideas I've got now are better than the physicalist ideas, which doesn't mean that I believe I'm absolutely right. I think I'm on a better track, and we'll see. So belief gets in the way. When dogmatism gets in the way, it's best to hold all of our ideas very tentatively. But on the other hand, you can't be too tentative in the sense that you do need to invest enough emotionally in them to really pursue them, right? If as a scientist, you have this balance. On the one hand, you don't want to be dogmatic. I don't want to be dogmatic. On the other hand, I need to find the idea exciting enough that I'm going to invest my valuable time trying to write down the mathematics and pursue it. I think it's good enough lead to follow it. So there's this balance that we have to have between the two.
Yeah, man. I tell you, this is the reason I became such a fan of yours, and to be honest, all the stuff you just said in general is an answer to the question that I sometimes am faced when I talk about this stuff, which is, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, why do I care that everything's reality is consciousness or matter, or why do I even care about consciousness? It doesn't get me through the day. Well, A, if you can hack into the source code, the technology changes.
Right.
B, we're stuck on so many scientific fronts and have been for a couple decades now. So maybe we're missing something that could help us progress.
Yes.
And 3, the fundamental thing that makes us human is our desire to understand our place.
Right.
And so, like you said, I think you're not supposed to, fall prey to belief, but you have to be passionate enough. It's funny because I went to like a 3.5-hour workshop of yours at this conference in San Jose, which I talked about previously on my show. And you took people on this journey. Like, we're not really doing that here. We're kind of hitting all these different points, kind of. In the book you do it, and it's like, okay, let me make this case that everything we believe about reality is based on an interface and a rookie mistake.
Right.
And here's the deeper truth. Here's the math. Here's what a conscious agent looks like. Here's how that relates to different things we've done, like split brain experiments,
right?
Turning a single conscious agent into 2 independently conscious agents that argue with each other in the same skull.
Yes.
By cutting this meat called the corpus callosum, which we may presume is not meat, but some icon pointing to how conscious agents are exchanging experience.
Yes.
And when you cut that physically, meaning you do something to those conscious agents, you now have 2 instantiations of awareness that are independent, and this is shown in experiment to actually be experientially true. So you took us on this journey in this conference, and you have scientists there, you have spiritual kind of people that are like, hey man, the crystals, man, is this like drugs, man?
Right.
And these guys like the guy who invented the graphical user interface for the Mac is there, and these guys, and I'm sitting there, and by the end it was like you get this feeling of emotion, and I'm speaking for myself, where I felt like, you know what you're saying, even if it's not exactly correct, is more correct than anything I've ever felt. And I've studied science all my life. I do medicine. I take care of people. It's like, that's when I said, okay, anything I can do to help promote this understanding, discourse, dialogue, expansion, refutation of this idea, I have to do. And that, I think, is how the intersection of science and inspiration and emotion and the human condition happens.
Absolutely. I agree that it's relevant because these are the questions that drive us. We are curious. Why are we here? What is life about? What happens when I die? These are the big questions that we would like answers to, and we have a chance with the tools of science to take the spiritual insights and fashion them into something so precise that we can get precise answers to these questions.
What happens when we die, Don, in your theory?
Well, one interesting option is this, and I'll give you a metaphor that sort of spells it out. Suppose that you go with some friends to a virtual reality arcade and to play virtual volleyball at the beach. So you put on your headset and bodysuits, and you're immersed in a beach scene with a net and palm trees and seagulls and so forth, and you see the avatars of your friends, and you start playing volleyball. And then one of your friends, Tom, at one point says, "I'm thirsty, I need to get a drink, I'll be back in a minute." He takes off his headset and bodysuit, and his avatar collapses motionless in the sand. To you, in the interface, in the VR interface, it looks like Tom is dead, but he's not dead. He just stepped out of the interface. And perhaps death is like that. We see the body, dead, cold, sitting there, lying there, but that's just the avatar. That wasn't the consciousness in the first place. What I see right now in front of me when I look at Zubin, I'm seeing an avatar that I create. I'm not seeing the true consciousness of Zubin. So if that avatar ceases to function, that doesn't mean that your consciousness is necessarily dead. So I want to explore in the mathematics of this conscious agent theory what does happen. The theory absolutely allows that consciousness persists after what we call physical death. Absolutely allows it. The technical questions for me are, so how much of the I, how much of the memories, how much of my personality, how much of all those things persist? And those are going to be very interesting technical questions that I don't know the answer to. So I'm really going to be interested to pursue that.
If we are these sort of nested conscious agents and we have access at a particular instantiation, in other words, we are the sum total of all these conscious agents
right.
that are at this particular level where we are aware, we're not exactly able to access directly the conscious agents underneath us,
right,
or the conscious agents above us, but both of them exert influence. So our conscious agent that's responsible for auditory perception is probably a nested consciousness that does something with experience out in the objective world of conscious agents that feeds it up to this particular level that we then experience. So death is an interesting thing. Because what is it? Maybe the stepping back down through the instantiations, or a stepping out into a higher?
Absolutely, and I don't know the answer to that. That's going to be very, very interesting to ask that question. But the interesting thing is, it should be a precise question, and the mathematics should allow us to give precise answers, or we'll need to enhance the mathematical framework. So the mathematics that I have to learn is network information theory.
Oh.
It's a fairly new branch of mathematics that's really come on because of the internet and wireless and so forth. So fortunately, because of all this new technology, we've had to solve these problems. So it turns out the mathematics, graph theory related to agents interacting is a new and well-developed and developing branch of mathematics. So I and my team are going to be learning this mathematics and using the theorems to try to understand how conscious agents interact and understand, to try to answer the kinds of questions you were asking. When we die, do we somehow interact with lower-level conscious agents, higher level? What's going on there? So the graph theory is going to be very, very interesting to go after this. But it's non-trivial math, I must say.
It's any math for me is non-trivial math.
Me
okay?
too. I go to the mathematicians.
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at your stuff, I read one of your source papers that you published and looking at Markovian kernels and this kind of thing, and it gave me chest pain. But I also enjoyed it because it was a fun ride to try to wrap my particular interface around. So see, this kind of thing, and then the question of artificial intelligence.
Yes.
How does so we talk about artificial intelligence, the way we think about it now is there's some ghost in the machine. There's a machine that's physical that we create that either approximates or somehow attains consciousness or at least is behaving intelligently.
Right.
But you're saying something differently. First of all, there's not a machine.
Right.
We're saying we can tweak within our interface something that might open a portal into the realm of conscious agents that we currently don't have. Can you explain that? Because this will melt people's heads because it melted mine.
That's right. So I've been involved in artificial intelligence since 1979 when I went to the AI lab at MIT, and I've been very interested in it. And the question of could AIs, of course we can make them smart. They're beating us at all sorts of stuff now. So that's not an issue. The issue is, could they actually have genuine experiences? Could an AI feel love? Could it taste vanilla and actually enjoy the taste of vanilla? Could silicon circuits and software do that? Most of my colleagues think yes. They think that somehow programs, sophisticated programs, are in fact what consciousness is, although they can't tell me the program, and they can't say, so it's just an idea. Right now it's a philosophical idea. There is no scientific theory on the table. But in general what they're saying is that somehow with these unconscious circuits and unconscious software, we will boot up real conscious experiences. So that's the question typically about could AIs be conscious. The question is, could the circuits somehow that originally were unconscious, could they become conscious if they're complex enough? I'm saying that's the wrong way to think about the problem. We're assuming that circuits in space and time are objective reality. But in fact, that's just a user interface. And we know that our user interface, as you've said, gives us portals into consciousness. My icon of Zubin Damania is giving me a portal into the experiences of Zubin Damania. Very, very small portal, but a genuine portal. So for me, the question is this. Once we understand the realm of conscious agents with mathematical precision, and we understand the mapping between conscious agents and their dynamics and our space-time interface, so that we understand it well enough to hack it, will we be able to open new portals in our space-time interface into the realm of conscious agents, perhaps using technologies like silicon and circuits and software? Will we be able to re-understand that technology in a deeper way that allows us to open portals into this pre-existing realm of conscious agents? For what it's worth, I think the answer is yes. And I say that both with excitement and trepidation, because that's unbelievable power. And it's not clear what we're going to meet on the other side. I don't know if all those conscious agents out there are what we would call nice. I just don't know. So I think but notice it's not could unconscious circuits and software boot up consciousness. It's rather, will we understand our interface well enough and what's behind the interface, so conscious agents, well enough that we can rejig our interface, perhaps using silicon and germanium and other circuit kinds of materials, and open a new portal into the pre-existing realm of conscious agents. So that's one kind of answer. I think the answer is yes. But in that case, we're not creating new consciousnesses, we're opening portals to them. So there's another question here. Once we understand this technology, could we create new consciousnesses in the realm of conscious agents? And if we look at what we can see in our interface right now, we do see cases where it looks like new consciousnesses are being created. Reproduction, sexual or asexual. When cells divide, we may be, in our interface, getting a pointer to a birth of a new kind of conscious agent. When two parents reproduce sexually and have a kid, we believe that we're being introduced to a new conscious agent, and that new conscious agent is having conscious experiences that I don't have direct awareness. So the mother, the father have their consciousnesses. They come together and have a child which has a consciousness that is opaque to them. They have to interact through an interface, the body of that child, to see what's going on with the child's consciousness. So we seem to have hints in our interface of technologies for creating new consciousnesses. Now, if that's right, if that's the right way to read the interface, and maybe I'm reading it wrong. I mean, that's one thing I'll have to find out when I get the theory of conscious agents more worked out in the projection. I'll be able to see, am I reading the interface wrong? But suppose that's not wrong, that we really are seeing new conscious agents being created when we reproduce, sexually or asexually. That would mean that there are technologies within our interface that we can use to create new conscious agents. The technologies we have are crude right now, having sex. I mean, it's not a high-tech thing, but it works.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, right. But eventually, once we understand that, we may be, and we understand, asexual reproduction, just mitosis, we then may be able to understand how to use our interface to create new consciousnesses. So the answer, the AI thing, we may just open new portals into existing consciousnesses with the new technologies, or we may get to the point where we're creating new consciousnesses, but it's in a different way than the AI folks are thinking about it. They're saying we take unconscious fundamental reality and make it complicated enough and it creates consciousness. I'm saying, no. Reality is conscious all the way down. My interface is hiding most of it, but my interface is giving me tools to play with the realm of conscious agents. Will it give me the tools to actually open new portals to consciousness and perhaps to create new consciousness? And I think the answer might be yes.
Wow.
It's a different way of thinking about it.
I really like that. One interesting thing is consciousness, like energy. The question is, can it neither be created nor destroyed? Is there just an infinite, out of space, out of time conscious pool, and you're subdividing it? And so a child is like a little split off, and it starts to evolve out, which gets to the question of the evolution of conscious agents, their complexity, and yeah.
That's getting to the limits of my brain's. But here's how I'm thinking about it. And I'm hoping to have a new generation of younger researchers that can, help push these ideas further. I don't think that there's a limited pool of consciousness. I think it's endless. Mm-hmm. And there's some dynamic that will never end. And one reason I think that is something that's called Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Now explain that.
So Gödel was this brilliant mathematician, who did some of the most profound research in logic of the 20th century. He was a friend of Einstein. They hung out together at the Institute for Advanced Study. And among the many contributions of Gödel was this, that if you have a mathematical system that has a set of premises, axioms, you can, and is sophisticated enough to actually, say, do arithmetic, then you can, as a mathematician, you can grind out all the theorems. You can use the axioms to prove all these various theorems. And what he showed, what Gödel showed, was all the theorems that you get by grinding through the axioms mechanically will not get you to all the truths. There are truths that can't be proven. Now, that truth that escapes your current set of axioms, maybe if you increased your set of axioms or changed your axioms, you could get to that truth, but then there would be new truths that you couldn't get to by your proof. And this I think, bears on science. Every theory starts with premises, assumptions. These are the magic, the miracles of the theory. No theory in science explains everything. There's no theory of everything. Every scientific theory says, please grant me these 1 or 2 or 3, a handful of assumptions. If you grant me those, I can explain all this other stuff. But what Gödel seems to be saying to us is, no matter what assumptions a scientific theory has, there will be truths that escape that scientific theory. And when I think about this now, from the point of view in which I say consciousness is the fundamental reality, that's all there is. How does mathematics fit into that? The way I think of it is that mathematics is like the bones within consciousness. It's the structure of consciousness. When we actually study consciousness, in a field called psychophysics, we actually have for many decades studied with precision conscious experiences in the lab, and they're structured. We can write down mathematics. Math and consciousness are not alien. They're not separate. It's rather they're really integrated like flesh and bones into one unit. And that's why I think about like mathematics as the structural bones of consciousness. It's not the whole of consciousness, but it's an essential and ineliminable part of consciousness. And given that, now Gödel's theorem is telling us something very important. First, my assumption is that all that there is consciousness. So all that math and structure is about consciousness. There's an infinite variety of structures, and Gödel's theorem is telling us the exploration of this mathematical structure, and therefore of the consciousnesses with that structure, is never ending. Never ending. It cannot come to a halt. There is no halt. It's provable that this never halts. Is that the deepest dynamic of consciousness? The endless exploration of all the possibilities of consciousness and its structure. That's the best idea I've got so far. It's like the kid in the candy store, but the candy store is infinite, and there's all sorts of chocolates and other things that you couldn't even imagine are out there. And go for it, kid. Explore it. It's never stopping. That's what Gödel's theorem seems to be saying to us. And so that seems to be saying to me that there's no end to the proliferation of consciousnesses. It's never going to stop. And so it's pretty exciting. It's very, very exciting. So that's the best idea I have so far, and that may be the deepest dynamic.
Wow, man, that is if that's true, it's beautiful.
I hope it's true.
It's as beautiful a thing as I've heard, and I have to say maybe that if that's true and everything, again, consciousness is primal, math is the bones of it. These theorems say that it doesn't end. It's going to constantly keep spinning out and evolving, and we're a kid in the candy shop just making it happen. People ask about the meaning of life. I can't think of a better meaning of life than that. Explore, grow, evolve.
Enjoy.
Right. Experience.
Absolutely.
That's the currency of everything. And love each other too, because we are all connected.
Absolutely.
And so here, and this is where all the scientists tune out. Okay, he said love, we're out. The interesting thing about all of that is, does it ultimately get at the dynamics of conscious agent evolution, that there is a deep drive even that, because entropy says, well, things go to disorder and so on.
Right.
But yet evolution seems to be this, it's not truly an exception because the system still goes to disorder, but you're creating increasing complexity. Maybe conscious agents really just want to connect and exchange and get more complex.
I think that's a very, very good point, because it's in the interaction of conscious agents that you get new conscious agents. And so the exploration continues. And so I could imagine that the genesis of new agents comes from partly the interactions, the love, hopefully all love, we'll see. The interactions between conscious agents leading to new ones, and maybe I may have to postulate also de novo new conscious agents just appearing. We'll have to see, what I will only do that if it's required, but we won't have the minimum magic. in any scientific theory. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But it does. I think that the notion of love may play a role in it, in the sense that it is the connections between conscious agents, the interaction between conscious agents, that does give rise to new conscious agents. So yeah, I'm on board with that.
Man. And this is the thing, like, people have talked about this stuff for millennia, right? But they've never talked about it with a scientific precision, with actual theorems. And I think what I thought was so interesting about your work, again, is that you're bringing that to it. And even if they're wrong, at least we're trying this interesting. And if we're going down the wrong route, we'll find out, because those theorems will be disproven, or you'll find something incompatible with it, and then you have to alter it. That's science.
That's right. I think that we all want to understand who we are. We want to understand what this is all about. And dogmatism gets in the way. Assuming that you know the answers means that if you happen to be wrong, you're stuck. And so it's best to hold our beliefs very, very loosely. Have enthusiasm, but be open to be wrong. And the point about science is to be precise, so you can find out precisely why you're wrong. And hopefully quickly. It's better to be disabused of your wrong ideas earlier rather than later, so that you can move on. So it's hard for us, because we like dogmatism. Seems to come natural to us. It seems to be part of our nature to say, I've believed this since I was 5. You're not going to dissuade me of it. But that really closes us off to new ideas and new exploration. And so that may be part of this whole dynamic too. Maybe there's an infinite amount to explore, and part of the exploration is letting go of what we think we already know. That may be part of what this whole dynamic of consciousness is about, is this letting go of dogmatism is part of what it takes to be the kid in the candy shop that gets to do all this exploring. Hey, look, kid, if you stick with your dogmatism, you only get to see these candies over here. You get all these other candies are forbidden to you unless you're willing to let go and open up to a broader perspective.
This man, Don Hoffman, you speak my language. You know, these are the only things I am interested in anymore in life, are these questions, which is strange, because I'm getting older, and these are the things, you know, I'm supposed to be interested in the minutia of medicine and all that. I'm like, just manipulating icons. I want to know what's behind the icons. And now now there's a lot. Oh man, where to even, gosh, so good. Could talk to you for like 30 hours. So I want to at least get into, okay, let me ask you this question. You're talking about closing off the candy shop because dogma. We evolved reason not to find truth. We evolved reason to persuade others in our tribe that we're correct. It's like our Kahneman's, Daniel Kahneman, talking about System 1 and System 2. Jonathan Haidt talking about elephant and rider. Our mind is really kind of two minds. We have this very conscious, deliberate, strategic, high energy requiring mind that does logic and reasoning and math and verbal and that sort of thing. And then you have this unconscious, emotional, intuitive, heuristic mind that operates in the background. In your conscious agent theory, actually, this actually might unfold in that you have this level of conscious agents emerging your current awareness, and that's System 1. Like, you can be thoughtful and deliberative, but that emotion you feel, or that threat you feel, or that fear you feel, that's your quick heuristic, are the agents underneath feeding up to you.
Yes.
And influencing your quote-unquote free will.
Right.
So in your estimation, like, each of these agents has its own kind of ability to perceive, decide, and act based on its world that it's encountering, which is the conscious agent social network, the experience that it has, and the action it wants to take. And but the lower agents kind of can constrain what the higher agents can do, and the higher agents feedback and constrain. So your mind is this constant dynamic between processes unconscious to you and processes that you're conscious of, and maybe even higher processes when you go into a football game and you feel that connection, or you go to a church or a monument and you see art with other people and you're all tuned in. Like when I was at your conference, everybody was like this, and there was one sort of, you could almost feel an emergent understanding, right? And so it's this constant sort of dynamics. I don't know what I'm getting at with this beyond this is me thinking out loud about how our own minds work and how I can think about elephant and rider and Kahneman system 1, system 2
Right.
in the conscious agent framework.
Right. It's a very, very good point you bring up, and I think it's an important issue. You're right that from evolutionary psychology, it appears the best understanding from evolutionary psychology is that logic and reason, in some sense, evolved as a social tool of persuasion. This is the thesis of Dan Sperber and Hugo Mercier, and others. And it's controversial, but it's very, very interesting. And there seems to be a lot to it, that we evolved logic and reason to persuade others about what we already believe. I mean, I think the right way to take down that woolly mammoth is this way, and we're going to need all 17 of us guys to do it this way together, because we can't do it I can't do it by myself. And someone else says, no, I think the right way to take down the woolly mammoth is this other way, where you should run it off a cliff or something. And so it's not the dispassionate search of truth tool that we might think it is. It's rather the social persuasion tool. And some evidence that that's the case comes from, we are best at our logic and reason when we're in a social debate. We find that ideas come quickly, we're quick on our feet and so forth. And a lot of my research is done in a group with other researchers where we're talking, because it's in that social setting that the logic and reason, that's its native ground. That's where it evolved to hunt. And so I get together with my team and we hunt ideas together, because that's where the logic and reason evolved to do this kind of hunting of ideas and the back and forth. But now at a deeper level, so that's evolutionary psychology, and I love evolutionary psychology. It's an incredibly powerful tool, so I'm not putting it down at all. In fact, I talk about evolutionary psychology in my book. But I think there's a deeper point of view outside of space and time. Evolutionary psychology is a theory within our interface. And there's an interesting assumption that goes into evolution. Limited resources. If resources were not limited, there would be no need for competition, and there'd be no need for evolution. We could all just have everything we wanted. It's the limited resources, and I have to think, is the belief or the idea or the experience that we have limited resources an artifact of our interface and not an insight into reality? Reality itself, resources may be totally unlimited, and maybe in the realm of conscious agents, it's not an issue. I don't know. If that's the case, though, then there would be a deeper dynamics. And when we project it into an interface in which it looks like resources are limited, then we get this sometimes bloody competition for resources that leads to evolution by natural selection. So I want a deeper framework in which we understand evolutionary psychology as a projection of a deeper dynamics of consciousness. So it's sort of getting at what you're talking about, the whole dynamics of how does it relate to evolutionary psychology. I think it's going to be, again, we'll have to have a deeper dynamics of conscious agents, and maybe when we project in an interface where we have this appearance of resource limitations, we're going to get a lot of the features of evolutionary psychology coming out.
This idea of resource limitation, to me, I've sat and thought about this. And by the way, so where you're talking about social connection being facilitative towards reasoning and thoughts, 1,000%. And I just want to put a point on that. In medicine, in healthcare, one of the great tragedies of the last decade or so has been the siloification of our communication. So instead of getting in a room in a doctor's lounge or in a nurse's station, exchanging ideas about patients with specialists and people taking care of them at all different levels, we go behind a computer interface and we send staff messages.
Right.
And it's not the same.
No.
And so a lot of that fluidity, a lot of the creativity, a lot of the humanity, and a lot of the brilliance of medicine has been sucked into algorithms and checklists and things that we think, using a computer model of thinking, the brain is a computer, we should think more like a computer. We're missing the underlying reality, the conscious experience of our patients, the internal experience, and how it affects this physical icon of their, and it's been a tragic thing. So we need to get away from that, or at least use the tools where they're useful, and use what we are uniquely human about, which is connecting with other humans.
That's right.
More effectively. Now, resource limitation is fascinating because it's the central driver of everything in our current universe interface. The lack of energy and constantly having to budget. If we had unlimited resources, in other words, we have the hack into Grand Theft Auto where you have unlimited life points or whatever.
Right.
Suddenly it's not much fun of a game, I'll tell you that.
Right.
Because you're just doing whatever you want. But all that competition, all the strategy, all the effort that goes into being frugal, into making sure that maybe space-time evolved as an interface because it tells me how many experience points I need to get to that apple over there means it's going to cost me this much calories. Why do we even need calories? So it's interesting if you're going to dive into the fundamental nature of an infinite conscious universe. Why is there finite resources?
Absolutely, and it may just be an illusion. That the appearance of finiteness may be illusion. I'm not secure on that point. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm absolutely sure. When I go at this realm of conscious agents itself, I may find resource limitations there as well, but I'm not sure that I will. And this idea from Gödel's theorem that there's endless exploration and there's no limit to it makes me think that maybe it's unbounded and in its potential.
So maybe at this level there's limitation. So I think you mentioned in the book, and I think this is an important point to make, that there are limited resources involved in being able to have experiences. In other words, having a large repertoire of conscious experiences is somehow costly. It takes effort and energy. And so we dumb it down by definition at our particular instantiation of complexity. We can't overdo it or we run out of steam. It's kind of like when we're using system 2 and we're trying to overthink things. It gets exhausting and we rely on our gut.
That's right.
And so this idea of again getting at this sort of limit. I mean, again, this is a conversation for another time, but I have to make sure. Well, by the way, any comment on that beyond what we're talking about?
Yes, I think that what you're saying is exactly the right way to think about it from an evolutionary point of view.
Right.
That's exactly the right way to think about it. And the question is this resource limitation? So for example, the argument that I've given, that we have to have this interface that dumbs things down and so forth. The assumption I was making is, let's assume space, time, and matter, and evolution by natural selection. The reason I did that was that's where my colleagues are. Those are premises that they will accept. So let me start with premises in a scientific theory that my colleagues will accept and show that it means that we're not seeing the truth. This is just a dumbed down user interface. And so I was able to. Now, given that I've done that, I can now step back and say, well, but I don't need to commit myself to space-time, and I don't need to commit myself to evolution by natural selection being the final true theory. It was just the best theory we have so far, and I can use that theory to bring my colleagues, hopefully, along to a new way of thinking about things. But now when I go to this deeper theory of conscious agents, I don't yet know whether the notion of limitation applies there or not. So that's really weird. I mean, when Einstein wrote down general relativity, he didn't know that it was going to entail black holes. So that's the thing about scientific theories. That's why we do the math. The theory is smarter than you. At some point, the theory teaches you, and you become a student of your theory. And I expect that there are all sorts of implications in in the theory that I've written down. And by the way, when I say my theory, I should mention my colleagues Chetan Prakash, Chris Fields, Manish Singh, Robert Prentner, Federico Fagin. I mean, I'm working with, so it's not just me. It's a whole group, a whole team. Shanna Dobson. So we're all working on this together. So, but the math is smarter than any of us. And there's some pretty smart mathematicians in that group, and the math is smarter than them. And so it'll be fun to study what it entails. Are there limited resource implications or not?
So, and one thing I gotta say, we were talking about this a little bit before. Nobody really funds this kind of research,
right.
And it's just like I forget it was Sean Carroll or who was on Rogan's show recently, and he was talking about studying the fundamental foundations of quantum mechanics.
Yes.
And this idea that no one wants to pay for that because nobody cares.
Right.
What they care about is what can you build using
Right.
the current interface.
Right.
And so one thing I want to make sure that people understand is that, there's people out there that independently, philanthropically fund research. They should
Yes.
look at the kind of research you're doing, because it is, in my mind, the most important thing we can possibly study. And then I want to make sure that I mention this, because this came up as soon as we started thinking about this and at the conference as well, which is, you are someone who said, and you've told me privately and publicly, you've never done psychedelics.
Right.
You've never smoked a cigarette.
Right.
You're
Right.
a pretty straight shooter. Your father is a Methodist fundamentalist. This is not how you roll.
Right.
You're not some yogi in India sitting on a mat all day doing psychedelics and saying the nature of consciousness is there is only consciousness. So that
I'm a geek.
What's that?
I'm a geek.
You're a geek, like me.
Right.
And so now the thing is, as someone who has dabbled in college in psychedelics and who's talked to other people who have done them, it seems clear from anyone I talk about this theory. They say, oh yeah, of course. Whether I've done 5-MeO-DMT, or whether I've done that comes from a toad, or whether I've done psilocybin, which comes from a mushroom, or whether I've done LSD, which comes from synthetic ergotamines, ultimately from a mold, I think. All those things seem to do is open a different interface that now we encounter. And one of the common things that people say is it's an overwhelming experience that feels as real as our current, maybe more real than our current interface, that they feel like they're seeing things that are there always but that we have no access to, and that they're able to make these sort of experiential, have these experiences that, again, feel like maybe they're experiencing plant, reality or fungal reality or something like that. And they have truly, some quote unquote mystical experiences.
Yes.
Is it possible that something in these, and these are microgram quantities of chemicals. If chemicals are an icon, could it be that you're somehow moving some sort of conscious agent that interacts with your network of conscious agents and has some network effect that changes the interface so that transiently you can experience something? Even people say they're outside of space and time, they're eternal, right? Sam Harris in his book Waking Up talks about spending an eternal communion with a redwood tree while on acid.
Wow.
It was one of his earlier experiences. He says one thing to think about this, it's another thing to experience it. And it's ineffable. You can't put it in words because it doesn't make sense in our current interface. Again, you haven't done these drugs. Do you think that's possible in this?
Yes, I think that this whole framework allows that psychedelics may be a technology, perhaps an initial and crude technology, by which we can hack our interface and either open up the interface to have a more direct perception of conscious agents, or to transition to other interfaces. This theory allows an infinite variety of interfaces. There's an infinite variety of exploration of different just kinds of interfaces. And there is an infinite variety of conscious experiences that various conscious agents can have. Color, vision, taste, smell, touch, emotions. These are our limited range of experiences. The theory says there's an infinite variety of kinds of sensory modalities, not just colors, but sensory modalities that are utterly alien sensory modalities to explore. And so I would think that as we make progress on understanding the realm of conscious agents and our interface, we will develop technologies that allow us to systematically go beyond our interface and perhaps enter different interfaces and play in different interfaces. And that we will go back and recognize that the psychedelics were the first very, very crude technology. We didn't know what we were doing. It's like we first start playing with fire, and then eventually we have rockets that go to the moon, right? But we had to start playing with fire before we could send someone to the moon. And so that may be what's going on. The crude technology, but eventually we will be not just psychonauts, but we'll actually be in the realm of conscious.
In in reality.
That-
We'll be in reality.
Will be in reality.
Yeah.
And we'll be going through the realm of conscious agents and exploring there. And maybe even going beyond all interfaces and experiencing what is it like to be a conscious agent without an interface, without a self. And I think this is all fun to explore. I mean, I think science fiction should explore this, and then hopefully the science will catch up with the imagination of science fiction, that our mathematics can catch up.
Yeah. Do you remember the movie Brainstorm with Natalie Wood?
No, I don't.
Oh, it's one of these early VR movies from like 1979, and
I
Natalie
should
Wood
look.
died in the middle of it. But it was a technology where you could put on a device and experience someone else's experience. And
Oh, okay.
someone dies while wearing the device and recording.
wow.
And so people have this experience of death. It's really, really interesting. I mean,
I'll look at that.
Kind of ahead of
That's-
its time. Yeah, so these ideas of like opening these portals and this idea of consciousness without self-experience. These are ancient spiritual ideas.
Right.
You can access these things through meditation. I've had glimpses of these experiences in meditation.
Yes.
So a selfless conscious awareness that's just a still silent awareness as maybe even the substrate of what awareness is.
Right.
You can experience that. And I think we were talking earlier about Rupert Spira and other people who are more of the sort of mentors in this, how to discover this type of meditation. And it doesn't require drugs, and it doesn't require anything
Right.
like that. But you're right, this idea of this is a kind of primitive technology like fire.
Right.
I used to make this, smoking marijuana is like being hit on the head.
Right.
It shifts your interface slightly.
Right.
And for some people, this is my theory, for some people who are innately anxious or restless or something's wrong, it shifts the interface slightly so that they can actually get by.
Interesting.
For others, like myself, it shifts it to be slightly more paranoid.
I see. Okay.
Tastes are different. Everything's a little bit turned up, and some things are turned down, and sleep is disrupted. And this and that. So again, thinking about it from an interface theory,
I see.
drugs, the effect of drugs make a lot more sense than even thinking about it from a mechanistic causal. The brain is causal,
Right.
as opposed to a correlate, an icon.
Right.
How does a tiny compound make the brain somehow create this brand new insane conscious
Right.
experience? It makes much more sense that it's a rejiggering a little bit of our interface.
That's right.
That makes me want to ask you this. So this is I don't know that we have an answer to this. How are our interfaces passed on? What's encoding them?
Oh wow, that's a really interesting question. And it's a big open problem for me and my team. What is DNA? What is genetics? That is an interface symbol. What does it point to in the realm of conscious agents? And why is it when we reproduce a consciousness that's very, very similar to us?
Personalities are the same.
So that's going to be a really, I really want to reverse engineer this, our interface, to find out what is the DNA, what is that technology doing? Why would conscious agents, in the realm of conscious agents, tend to create new conscious explorers that are similar to them? Maybe it's like it's a systematic search that's going on, right? So of course there are tens, hundreds of millions of different creatures that have been on Earth. So in some sense, there's been a wide range of exploration that's going on, and maybe it's just a nice search procedure where we're searching this part of the search space, and so we're creating. Our children are really just new conscious agents searching more in the same part of the consciousness search space that we were in before. So that might be, but how that cashes out in terms of DNA and understanding DNA in the realm of conscious agents, I am really eager to solve that problem. That's going to be really fun. So.
It's hugely interesting to me because the epigenetics even beyond DNA.
Right.
But what does that mean? Again, what is it pointing at? Really, if we believe this to be correct, this sort of interface theory. And by the way, for people who don't still believe that this is just an interface, the example of synesthetes, people who have synesthesia, they are mutants in the interface.
That's right.
They're variants where they may see tastes or feel tastes. So you give great examples in the books of people who do this.
Right, and so one example, so about 4% of us are synesthetes. So it's not a small fraction. And it looks like it's, from an evolutionary point of view, evolution is tinkering with the interface, and that's no surprise. We're mutating all the time, and that's how, you know, we adapt to new situations. And synesthesia is a really good example for one of the problems that most of us have. Most of us think that when I see a bottle, there is a bottle. I see the moon, there is a moon. Physical objects have a real grasp in our imagination. It's hard for us to imagine that when I see a bottle, that it could be anything other than just seeing the truth, that it really is a bottle. And so synesthetes are helpful, because there are some synesthetes that experience three-dimensional objects for things that are not three-dimensional objects. So Michael Watson, everything that he tasted on his tongue, he felt a three-dimensional object in space in front of him with his hands, and he could feel all the way around it. It had a temperature, a surface shape, a texture. It could be pliable. It had a weight. And so mint, the taste of mint, also made him feel in three-dimensional space with his hands a tall, cold, smooth column of glass. Somehow that seems right to me, but I don't know why.
It does, right?
Yeah, it does seem right.
So he spun up 3 dimensions.
3 dimensions
From a taste.
From a taste. And there's mint does not resemble a tall, cold, smooth column of glass, and a column of glass is not the right way to do mint, right?
It might be.
That's right.
Well, so in an evolutionary sense,
Right.
in the future it might be.
Absolutely. If, for example, we were in a world in which women really prized men who could really cook. It turned out, because Michael Watson had this extra dimension of taste, he felt it in 3D as 3D objects, he was a great cook. So he could cook in way with subtleties that maybe most of us. So if it turned out that women really loved men who could really cook, then that his genes could have passed on, and we would all, every time we tasted something, we would not only taste it on our tongue, there would be all these rich three-dimensional objects in front of us that we would feel with our hands.
How heritable is synesthesia?
Oh, it runs in families.
So it does. So
it's-
we're seeing this heritable interface, right?
Right, that's right.
So again, what is it? What is DNA pointing to? What are the
Exactly.
epigenetics? What is the other embryologic development factors that, you know, we're ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, and we have gills and a tail.
Right. Lots to explore.
I know.
And these are going to be endless clues that if we're not smart enough to figure out from first principles what's going on in the realm of conscious agents, these are the clues that we'll pull back, we'll reverse engineer to help our imagination go where it couldn't go.
Man, it's an exciting time, I'm telling you. I really hope that there's more research along the lines of what you're doing, that your own research is well-funded and
Thank you.
publicized. Listen, the one thing you guys can do, Z-Pack, is get this book and read the F out of it. It is fantastic, and it takes you on a journey. And look, if you get to a part about visual perception where you're like, this is too heavy, just skip ahead. There's so much stuff, and the last chapter is about conscious agents. He saves it all for the end. He's like, oh, by the way, here's the nature of reality. I'm like, what? That's a whole book. That's like 30 books in and of itself.
The next book.
The next book. I don't know, Don, was there anything else you wanted to discuss as we pull up on how long are we going, Victoria? It's been a while. We're at 12:30 right now, so
I think we've covered it pretty well.
I think we,
Yeah, absolutely.
Although I could talk for like another couple, 3 hours.
It was just
Yeah.
endlessly fun.
Yeah.
And what we pointed out is there's centuries of work ahead in this framework. Centuries of work.
It's exciting. Now people are gonna be like, it's all BS and screw you guys. I'm going home. That's cool. But I will say this: this topic of discussion is something that has provoked the most outrage from my audience. They get viscerally angry when I talk about this stuff.
Wow.
And then there's a contingent, maybe let's say 15%, that are like, this is the only reason I watch your show. And they're like, really, this is a field of inquiry that they really care about. And I think, again, as the science starts to evolve, it's going to be exciting to bring you back and keep talking if
Absolutely.
you're game.
That'd be fun. Absolutely.
And anything we can do to promote your work, let us know. We again, get the book. I think the book is so important to really understanding the path that gets you to the realization that, okay, first of all, this is all a construct. Second of all, what's underneath? And if you don't believe conscious agent theory, then come up with a theory of your own.
Right.
The
Right.
one thing you cannot believe is that this stuff is real. I just don't think you can
Right.
look at the science and believe that. That being said, Don Hoffman, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
It was a great pleasure, Zubin. I really thank you for having me on.
Thank you. All right, we out.